The reading is taken from Mark chapter 11, beginning at verse 1. And it can be found in the church Bibles on page 45. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find there tied a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing, untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they'd cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he'd looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he wouldn't allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you had cursed has withered." Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
And thanks, Daniel, but I'll immediately move those back again. Right, so Palm Sunday. Donkeys. I love the, whoa, hello. Is that, yeah? Cool, good. Okay, I'm just going to speak and trust that David will fix that. I love the kid with the donkey at the front. Like, that was amazing. It was so cool. Right, so has anyone here ever ridden a donkey? Put your hand up if you've ridden a donkey. There's quite a lot of us, I mean, me too. Keep your hand up if you rode a donkey somewhere that wasn't at Blackpool. Oh, still quite a few, actually. Yeah, good. Keep your hand up if you rode a donkey in a situation that wasn't like a Blackpool-type situation, like a tourist resort. Oh, still a few. I would love, so make a note of who those people are. You need to chat to those people at coffee. if you're not already chatting to Lindsay about TLG. I want to know the context of those donkey rides. Like, were you in races? What were you doing? Wow. So I've ridden a donkey. I rode a donkey, I think when I was about 8 years old. And it was in a Blackpool type situation. It was in a place called Porthcawl, which is South Wales coast. And I think you would call it the Blackpool of South Wales if Barry Island didn't exist, right? But Porthcawl is very much in that conversation. It's knocking on the door of Blackpool. And we went there on holiday. We stayed in this caravan park. And on the beach, there was this guy with a donkey and giving rides to kids along the beach. And I took advantage of this with the help of my parents' money. And I had a lovely old time. That night, or maybe later in the holiday, it's a bit blurry when you're 8, but we were on the caravan park, and we didn't have a toilet in our caravan. And you had to walk across the caravan park to the toilet block, this big old concrete shed. And I remember one night, I didn't wake my parents when I needed to go to the toilet. I just sort of slipped out of the caravan and crept across the gravel and forgot to put my shoes on. So this might be why I remember it, because of the intense pain in my feet going across the caravan park. And I got to the toilet block and suddenly heard this noise next to me from my left. And, I mean, maybe I'll attempt this. It's like a... That was awful, right? You get the idea. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I turned, and there was a donkey in the field next to me. It was the donkey that I'd ridden a couple of days before, and it apparently just lived in this field next to the toilet block. It was sort of hanging its head over the fence. And I'd taken out a chat to it for a couple of minutes at sort of 2 a.m. It was a very sort of surreal experience. And this is our kind of context for donkeys. Like, your context might be slightly different to mine, but a lot of it is around sort of, kids, tourists, and all this sort of thing, and they're cute little animals, and they're not as scary as horses, and they're a bit more cuddly and friendly. And, I mean, I find them less weird than horses as well. I find horses very odd. I feel I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think it's important. I find horses a bit top-heavy. Like, it feels like their legs don't really support their bodies, whereas donkeys feel more in proportion. Anyway, that's by the by. The point is, we think of donkeys as these sort of cuddly creatures, and they kind of are. And they are in the ancient world as well. And they're work animals, and you expect kings to be riding horses and to be, really warlike. But actually, warlike is the point. Kings rode horses when they were going to war. Actually, when a king is giving across a message that they're coming in peace, they would ride a donkey. And this happens several times in the Bible. King David rides a donkey when he's trying to promote peace. And when Solomon, his son, comes into power, David gives him his donkey to ride into Jerusalem and say, I am the rightful king, and I'm bringing peace, a kingdom of peace. And so when Jesus rides a donkey into Jerusalem, he's getting across this message. It's a piece of street theatre saying, this is who I am. I am the son of David. I'm the true king. I am coming into Jerusalem the way Solomon does. And literally the way Solomon does. Like, from the same direction. Solomon also comes from the Mount of Olives. So if you could change slide, Sue. This is a painting from the 19th century of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. So this is the direction that Solomon and Jesus both come to Jerusalem. And where you see the mosque, the Dome of the Rock, that's been there since sort of the 7th century, in Jesus' day that would have been the temple. So just superimpose in your imagination the temple on top of that. And they come from the Mount of Olives, and they go down in this sort of shadowy place is the Kidron Valley, and then they come back up to the Temple Mount. And these sort of mountains are sort of similar heights. So you're going down the Mount of Olives and then back up again to the Temple Mount. And we say mountain, they're actually not that tall. They're less than twice the height of Mamtor. They're not enormous mountains, but they are symbolically very tall. They think of them as the highest places on earth. because this is where God is. This is where the light of the world is coming to the nations. And people are meant to be coming there to worship God. And this is actually happening at this point in time when Jesus is entering Jerusalem. People are flocking to Jerusalem to worship God. Now, Jerusalem in those days has about 50,000 people, which to us doesn't sound very big. It's about just over twice the size of Marple, right? It's not enormous. But in the ancient world, that's actually quite a big city. But on Passover week, they attract another 150,000 people to the city. Now, I don't know how many people are in here this morning. Actually, Kate, you should have counted. There are 127 people in here this morning. Okay, so that's like, there's normally 127 people. Why am I doing this to myself? 127 times 3 is like 370 something, 381. So you add that on to 127. It's like 500 and something people into this place. That's insane. My maths might be wrong there. It's possible. But you get the idea. That this is crammed. This is what Jerusalem is like on Passover week. And this is when Jesus times his entry into Jerusalem, announcing that he is the king. And he's greeted by people waving these things, palm leaves. You can imagine Jesus coming through these palm leaves. And they're all waving them. And it's like, I think the picture you're meant to get is as if the people of Jerusalem, or Jerusalem itself, is like this giant tree waving around Jesus as he enters. It's this really interesting image. And the reason I think that we'll get to in a second. Because this collection of stories that we've read this morning feels random, I think. It feels like they've just been thrown together by Mark, and they don't make much sense as to why they go in that order. Where you have Jesus entering on the donkey, and then you have this fig tree where Jesus is hungry, and he gets cross because he can't get any food, and he curses the tree. And then he casts people out of the temple because they're not doing what he thinks they should be doing. And then they come back and find that the fig tree is dead. And then he tells them that they can throw a mountain into the sea and it'll go if they have enough faith. And you're just like, what is going on here? What is Mark on about? I think it's very deliberate. And I want to walk you through it because I think the point of it is really, really important. So, can we have the next slide, Sue? So we start on a mountain. We start on the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus enters into Jerusalem. And Jesus is with his disciples. And think back through everything we've read in Mark. If Jesus is saying he's the king, and he's always said through Mark, I'm bringing the kingdom of God. What does that kingdom look like? Just throw out some examples at me. What does the kingdom of God look like from what Jesus has been doing through Mark? It's inclusive. Yeah, Jesus just welcomes everyone. Like, they need to change their ways, but he will have anyone and everyone. On his team of disciples, he's got fishermen, the quite poor people. He's got reformed terrorists, like zealots are not very nice people, really, in the ancient world. He helps prostitutes. He brings everybody in and welcomes everyone. And there's an equality to what Jesus is trying to bring about in his kingdom. There's an inclusivity to it. Yeah, anything else? What else is going on in the kingdom of God, according to Jesus? There's healing. Yeah, people are being healed and restored to who they're meant to be. Yeah, anything else? Deliverance. Yeah, so a different type of healing maybe, but restored in people in their right mind and taken away from addictions and problems that they have. Yeah, this is the kind of kingdom that Jesus is bringing. It's really beautiful. And he's riding into Jerusalem as the king of this kingdom. And this is what he wants to see in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is meant to be the center of this. This is what Jerusalem was always meant to be. They were called to be the people of God, but they were called to be the people of God in order to bless the whole world. That's the story of the Bible. And he thinks they might be failing. And I think the fig tree helps to show us why. So next, we have fig tree. And it's this weird little story where he sees leaves, a bit like this. Well, not quite like this. I was going to bring in a fig leaf, and my parents-in-law have a fig tree. I texted my mother-in-law and said, I don't suppose you've got a fig leaf on your tree? And this is the photo she sent me. So could you just... and she said, no, not quite, not yet. So I was going to bring a fig leaf in, but I couldn't. But basically, imagine this, but with lots of leaves on, right? So Jesus sees a fig tree with loads of leaves on, and he's a bit peckish because he's just entered Jerusalem on a donkey and had loads of crowds adoring him, and that's made him a bit hungry. But he finds there's no fruit on the tree. And he curses it and says, well, you'll never bear fruit again. You look like you're alive, and you're not. And then they leave. And that's the end of that scene. And then the next scene is them going to the temple. And they go into the temple, and Jesus sees all this activity that's going on in the temple. And he's really angry at it. I mean, imagine again that there are 200,000 people, nearly 250,000 people in Jerusalem, and they've all come to sacrifice to God at Passover. Well, if you're coming from various places, scattered all over Israel, all over the ancient world, and they're gathering, you're not going to bring your sacrifice with you if you come from a long way away. So what they do instead is they bring money with them to buy a sacrifice when they get there. Makes sense, right? It's what I'd do. And so what you need for that are money changers in the temple. So you need people who will be like an ancient bureau de change, right? Who will take your money and then give you money that can buy a lamb or doves in order to sacrifice. Now, the reason I say lamb or doves is because if you were too poor to afford a lamb, you were allowed to sacrifice a dove instead. They're a lot cheaper. And you notice in the passage who Jesus is angry at. He's angry at the money changers because they're scamming the people. They are skimming a massive profit off worship. It's probably not a great thing to do. And he's angry at the people who are selling doves because apparently they're doing the same thing. And they're targeting the poorest of the poor, the very people that he is including in his kingdom. And their kingdom does not look like the one that he wants to rule over. Okay, next scene. They go back to the fig tree. And the fig tree has died. It's withered from its very roots. And I think this is a commentary on what's going on in the temple. I think Jesus is saying the temple is like a tree that has loads of leaves, just like when they welcomed him into the city, waving loads of leaves. It looks alive, but it's not bearing any fruit. It's really dead. It looks alive, but it's dead. And this is his judgment on the temple. He's saying the temple is like the fig tree. But his kingdom is different. His kingdom doesn't look like very much. It looks like the son of a carpenter riding on a donkey with a bunch of ragtag disciples bumbling after him. But it bears fruit and it grows slowly. Think about how he's described the kingdom of God throughout Mark. He's talked about a farmer who scatters seed. He talks about a weed that grows behind someone's back and they don't notice it. He talks about yeast in bread. And he talks about a tree that grows slowly from a very small seed, but it becomes the mightiest thing on earth, and the birds of the nations come to roost in its branches. This is his vision of the kingdom, that it's not spectacular like Jerusalem at Passover, waving branches and looking alive. No, actually, it looks very small, but it grows in a slow and sustainable way, and it offers inclusivity and healing and deliverance and love and grace and mercy. And I think we can gather that from the place that Jesus comes from, where he gets the donkey from, on the Mount of Olives. It's a little village called Bethphage, or Bethphage in Hebrew. And it means house of the little fig. This is a place that doesn't look like very much, but it actually does bear fruit, because this is where the king rides from. And finally, we come back to a mountain, because the last thing in this story is where Jesus says, if you have faith, you can throw this mountain into the sea. I don't think he's talking about the Mount of Olives there. It starts at the Mount of Olives. I think he's talking about the Temple Mount. I think he's saying, this mountain needs to go. Because this was where the kingdom of God was centered. In this place, this physical place, but now it is centered in me. And now it is centered in you, the people. And so what we have through this story is this wonderful structure that Mark has put in place. Mountain, fig tree, temple, fig tree, mountain. That all points to what the problem is and what his solution is. And the solution is himself. And people start to see this as we go through Holy Week. And they don't like it. And so it ends up with him being crucified on a tree. And that's the beautiful contrast. Because Jerusalem has become this tree with leaves that looks so alive at Passover, bursting with life, but it's really dead. And Jesus on this tree, which seems dead, but is actually bursting with overwhelming life. Have the next slide, please, Sue. And this is what his kingdom does. And the next slide. It turns everything upside down. It's everything that you do not expect a king and a kingdom to be. And we are called to be citizens of that kingdom. This is who we are. He is our king, and we are citizens of that kingdom. Like, we went on holiday to Porthcawl because we're Welsh, right? I'm from South Wales. I feel culturally English most of the time, except when it comes to rugby, right? When it comes to rugby, I'm standing up there with everyone else singing "My hen, Wlad fy Nadau," land of my fathers. It's the only Welsh I speak, right? But I'm belting it out there. Or if Wales aren't playing, I'm singing the national anthem of whoever is playing England, right? I'm there singing Flower of Scotland or Waltzing Matilda, or is that what's the anthem? Advance Australia Fair. Yeah, or absolutely butchering La Marseillaise, right? Because I'm proud of my nationality. But I'm so much more proud that I'm a citizen of heaven. That is who I truly am. That is who I truly am. This story is a story of contrasts. So could I just have the last slide, please? It's a tale of two towns. It's a tale of Bethphage, the little fig, the small fruit, and of Jerusalem, that Jesus calls a den of robbers. The house of the little fig or the den of robbers. Of houses. Of two mountains. Mount of Olives, it doesn't look like very much, it's just got scattered villages. And of Jerusalem, the mount where everything looks like it's happening. God's kingdom doesn't always look like how we imagine it to look. It's a tale of two trees. The one that looks alive but is really dead, and the one that looks dead but is really alive. And it's a tale of two kingdoms. And which kingdom do we want to be representing? We are ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven. And as we go back into worship, we need to think of these songs as the anthems of this nation. Like, I'll stand up there and I'll sing Land of My Fathers or Advance Australia Fair or whatever it is, right? These songs that we sing are anthems of the kingdom of heaven. We are praising the King, and we are declaring who he is and who we are. We are citizens of a different kind of kingdom, a very upside-down kingdom that does not look as the nations of the world look. And that's very hard, because what it means is that we are called to carry one of these. We are called to bear crosses. We are called to follow the example of the King who would die for us. That's not an easy thing to commit to. And I don't want to sort of say what that looks like for you in your life. But I'll leave it open as a challenge for you. So let's worship our King. Let's raise him up as he will be raised up at the end of this week. And he enters Jerusalem as a king, and he's enthroned on a cross. You don't get more upside down than that. He's enthroned on a dead tree, and he blooms. So let's stand. Let's lift our hands. Let's lift our voices so that he might be lifted up. And let's commit to living as citizens of the kingdom of heaven as we go out into the world. Because everything hangs on what we do when we go out of this place. And you know what that hangs on? It hangs on the cross. 2,000 years ago. Because we're still singing about a poor son of a carpenter who changed the world. And now he changes the world through you and me. It's time to lift him up. Let's sing.